Our next guest, Mark Warner, joins us on the Murphy Hotline. He is president and CEO of Gulf Coast Energy to talk a bit about ethanol and generally energy in the state of Alabama. Mark, welcome to the program. It's good to have you on.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about Gulf Coast Energy and what you are doing and what you hope to accomplish in the near and long-term future.
Well, Gulf Coast is what would be referred to as one of the new cellulosic ethanol companies, though our technology is really the next generation. We have no fermentation of any kind, and we don't use any feedstocks from the food chain. So we're not making ethanol from corn. We're not using soybean oil or anything like that. It's all biomass gasification using wood waste, and we have the capability to make not just ethanol, but other carbon fuels as well, such as synthetic diesel and probably synthetic gasoline in the not-too-distant future.
You know, it's tough to know what's fact, what's truth, what's fiction, what's myth when it comes to ethanol production, Mark, and it's difficult for folks like me who, obviously, we've been talking a lot about energy and oil prices and the worth of ethanol in the form that you're discussing and in the form of, you know, corn ethanol. How is this different, aside from the obvious way that you're not using corn, so you're not ultimately affecting the price of food? How comparatively more efficient, or I guess start at the beginning and walk us through the process of ethanol production.
Well, I always like to tell people we're not making Jack Daniels. It's a little joke that we have. But if you look at the history of gasification, it's really a process that was developed by the Germans back in the 20s and was perfected by the South Africans in the 60s. And the main difference with what we're doing now in the U.S. versus what they've done for decades is just simply in the front end. We're putting something besides coal into the process to make fuels. So whereas with a fermentation facility is trying to get at sugars, which are plentiful and easy to get at with corn or sugarcane for that matter, our process doesn't really care about sugars at all. We just need the carbon. And typically a fermentation process will get anywhere from 70 to 90 gallons per ton of corn. Well, we can take those corn stalks and the corn stover on the ground and use a ton of it and get over 200 gallons. So our process is a great deal more efficient.
Well, if this process is, is this brand new technology, Mark? How many folks are doing this around the country?
There are other companies that are trying to start up similar to ours. It's all the newest movement, and typically people ask, why isn't everybody doing this already?
That was going to be my next question.
Well, it's a very good question. The trick is in all the details, and there are two parts in the process that are very design-intensive, especially when you're running biomass as opposed to coal. Coal breaks up very, very easily, and it's easy access to the carbon. And the Germans and the South Africans, as I said, have been doing that for decades, so that process is very known, it's very established. To try to run biomass requires retuning the whole input system, different temperatures, different pressures, different diameters, and then on the back end as well, you have to design all new catalysts to make the fuels that we're trying to get at here.
Look, I saw a show, well, it was Mythbusters. I imagine you're familiar with it, Mark. Where these guys took cooking oil, strained it, put it in a car, a diesel, and ran it.
That's right.
And without any modification of the automobile whatsoever, the car ran and, was relatively efficient, obviously relative to the cost of cooking oil. What would be the process in flipping over a car to run on ethanol? What are the percentages that we're talking about with your product?
Well, you can run any diesel-powered vehicle off of cooking oil. The differences are going to be in the quality of the fuel and what that might do to your fuel system. Companies like ours are going to certify all of our fuel products to the ASTM standards, so there will be very, very high-quality fuels. But I think the answer to your question is, in order to run ethanol, a vehicle has to be designed to handle ethanol from the standpoint of the fuel system and gaskets and pressures and all of those things that go into play during the design phase. If a vehicle is not designed to run ethanol, then ethanol can be damaging to the process. What companies like ours are doing is we recognize and see the demand for ethanol because ethanol is not just a replacement for gasoline. It's also used for pollution control in large municipal areas that have problems with ozone attainment. So we'll make ethanol, but we're also diving headstrong into the development and production of synthetic diesel fuel and ultimately synthetic gasoline as well. And those fuels will be able to go into any car just as a petroleum-based product will as well.
What all byproducts can you use? What can you put in to get out the ethanol?
Well, we are running only biomass, and this is one of the good stories. When you run biomass in a gasification process, the only thing that acts as a byproduct or that comes out as a byproduct is an ash that is essentially very high-grade topsoil. And we've already been talking to landowners and farmers in the Sumter County area that are very anxious to get their hands on our ash and to use it in conjunction with chicken litter as fertilizers. So as long as we're running biomass, our byproduct is an excellent fertilizer. Now, if you were to go to South Africa and look at their ash running coal, then that would be a different story, but we're not planning to run coal.
All right, but I'm sorry, what do you put in? I mean, I know wood byproduct, and you mentioned corn husk. I mean, what all could you conceivably use to produce the ethanol?
Theoretically, we can use anything with carbon. And over the last 15 years, we have tested about 36 different raw materials, but some of the more commonly known are any type of wood at all, of course, and it doesn't matter what the species is. But there's a lot of talk about switchgrass. We can run switchgrass. You can run hay. We could even run kudzu. If there was an effective way to collect the kudzu, we could run kudzu. Of course, you can run coal. You can run tires. You can even run municipal solid waste from landfills if you have a technology partner that can process it properly.
Wait a minute. You said you could use anything with carbon?
Theoretically, all you need is the carbon.
Oh, no. Soylent Green is people, Mark. I'm carbon.
Well, you know, theoretically, you could run bones. You could run...
Hey, I would go, you know what? If it helped out in the long term, I would be glad to donate.
Well, that's very generous of you, Matt. What we're focused on is using woody mass because in the state of Alabama, there is enough wood waste, and I'm talking about waste, to generate, using our process and our yields, over 2 billion gallons of fuel, and that's enough to fuel the whole state. Of course, the hard part is getting it to one location, and that's why we're planning to build multiple facilities in Alabama. For the time being, we're going to stay away from things like switchgrass just because we don't want to get farmers growing switchgrass where they might otherwise grow hay or food chain products. We're going to stick with the woody biomass, at least for the time being.
And this is so timely, Mark, because you're using a byproduct that does not affect the world like the corn ethanol obviously has. I mean, the unintended consequence of corn ethanol subsidy is now that this corn is being grown for ethanol as opposed to being grown for food. So we see an increase in the entire chain from meats to the corn and grain itself. Why in the world would anybody, now that this technology is being developed and your company is key in doing so, why would anybody continue to produce corn ethanol?
Well, Matt, first of all, the word is just getting out about our capabilities and the handful or fewer other companies that are getting close to being able to do the same things. So in one regard, we have to get the message out, and especially on Capitol Hill, let them know what the capabilities are so that they can adjust their policies appropriately. But what I always tell people is that there is no one panacea solution for our energy problem. It's all very, very regional. We're extremely fortunate to live in the Southeast, where essentially we live in an enormous pine forest in the entire Southeast. And that gives us a tremendous advantage in using this type of technology to make fuels. In the upper Midwest, they're not going to have access to as much woody biomass waste as we have. And so they may still have to make ethanol out of corn there. What we would like to do is make the southeastern United States, headquartered in Alabama, the central location, the focal point, if you will, for the new alternatives fuels industry. And we can make enough fuel that we can even transport it to other parts of the country and help them with their energy needs.
Mark, incredibly informative, and I wish we had longer. We're out of time, only about 20 more seconds, but I'm going to have you on again if you're willing, because I'd love to talk to you about this in the future. Will you do that?
Absolutely. My pleasure, and all I want to do is plug our website, www.gulfcoastenergy.net.
GulfCoastEnergy.net. Mark Warner, thanks so much for being on with us.
Thank you, Matt.
Our